My name is Ms. Pure, founder of the Neurodivergent Gift. Do you know what's going? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Ms. Pure, founder of the Neurodivergent Gift, and in association with Ausome Society and partnership with Ausome Society this month, we have started conversations really triggered by it being April, Autism Awareness Month, and really a great time for us to jump into conversations that really educate us, build community between us, and really impact how we are parenting our kids with autism. This month, we've already had conversations with therapists, so we've understood how autism and speech therapy work together. We've had conversations with teachers, really understanding how do we pick the schools that we put our children in. And then also, we've also had, just from a medical point of view, when it comes to how do I pick the dentist, how do I pick the doctor, how should I be approaching this space with my child, knowing of his needs and how we are engaging with the professionals. So today's conversation really is with Riona Chetty. I'll let her introduce herself in a bit, but what I love about today's conversation is that we're speaking about the financial impact of having a special needs child. So yes, it's autism awareness, and really that's been the kind of conversation this month. But really, when we talk about financial impact, we really can really speak about having a child who needs more than what the normal typical child would need. And the financial impact that journey really has on you as parents, on caregivers, and really the rest of the family, because it does go beyond just the parents and the actual caregivers. So I bumped into an article from Riona on LinkedIn. She works at Vouch, and really the topic of that article was the financial reality of raising children with disabilities, and really how does it impact us. And it really struck me, and I said, let's have a chat with her. Let's unpack this article further, and let's really understand how we can better prepare ourselves where we are for the betterment of ourselves, our families, and our children. So let's jump straight into it. Riona, thank you for your time. And really, to kick off the conversation, please can I ask you to introduce yourself? Who are you? What do you do? Why do you do the thing that you do? And what made you write this article?
Thank you, Nozi. It's amazing to join you today. So yeah, my name is Riona Chetty. I'm the head of advice at Vouch. And I've been in the financial services industry for over 25 years now. So very long time, and seen lots of sort of different scenarios. And when I first entered the industry, I entered by default. Like most of us, the world finds you, or your niche finds you. You don't always find it. So I entered it by default, and it resonated with me so much because there is such a huge gap for financial planning in this country. It's legacy issues. It's because not all of us had access to financial services before, but it's also because of a lack of education and understanding of what's out there.
Yeah.
So, my life is a testimony to financial advice. I openly share with you that, I lost my dad when I was really very young. I was a teenager. I was the oldest of three daughters, and my mom was a housewife. She never worked a day in her life and things like that. So it was a massive curveball to lose the breadwinner of the family. And we scurried together to make it work. So I couldn't go and study and things like that. And the reason why financial services and the financial planning is so important, because my dad had a small amount of life cover. It wasn't enough to sustain us to the same level, but it kept the lights on. And you cannot, diminish what that did in terms of giving us at least the basics so we could survive. So that's why I believe financial planning is really, really important. You asked why I wrote the article. So I'm also a mum of special needs children. I have two neurodivergent children. And like you, it took me totally by surprise. It was like biggest curveball of my life, getting that diagnosis. And I was not prepared for it. I'll be the first one to admit. I was not at all prepared for it. I think I cried for days after that, because the shock that it gives your system. And I also think that the message when it's delivered can be very harsh. So we were like stuck between, we had all these hopes and dreams and aspirations for this child when our first diagnosis came, and now you're telling us that none of it's going to be a reality, and what happens in between, you know. I must admit that, yeah, it really took me by a couple, but over the years, there's lots of changes that we've had to do in terms of how we live our lives, and what that meant. And it required a lot of adaptation, both from a normal day-to-day perspective in terms of how our home works and the dynamics and the availability of us and all of that, but also in terms of our finances. And the reason why I wrote the article is because I thought, you know what, these are two things I'm very passionate about, but they intersect. And in that place where they intersect, I think there's lots of other parents out there looking for guidance in terms of how to navigate this. And perhaps I could be of some help. So hence the article. Yeah.
Lovely. So why I loved this article so much also is that, so I also have a financial institution work background. And one of the things that I was looking after when I was in that space was member education. And that big conversation around, do you understand the money that you have? And do you understand how this money is able to work with the dreams and aspirations that you have for yourself personally, but also for the family that you are bringing up? And like you say, then there's that whole day when you get the realization that your child is not neurotypical, which means there is obviously that period of, like you say, you cried, where it's a case of there are things that you have to let go of, which you had really dreams around for your kid, and you were prepared to do so much. And now all of a sudden you're stepping into a world where you actually have no clear understanding of what is needed. If there's one thing which I've learned around this neurodivergent journey, is things also come up along the way. You know, when you start in the beginning, you kind of have the diagnosis, and you kind of have, once you do your own Google searches and once you have all the professional conversations, there's kind of a plan. Okay, these are the
Yes.
therapies that they need. These are the things that they need. But then as they grow, and also because we don't know how they're going to develop, you don't know what they will or will not be able to do. And you also, there's still a desire and aspiration which we hold as parents in the back of our minds. Though we
Yes.
have wrapped our minds and wrapped our hearts around, this is the child that I've been gifted, there's still that aspect of, if we pushed here, maybe this will actually come out.
Yep.
So you tend to also add other things on there which you try. I know my child, with growing up, we realized that he has a musical ear. So we had the conversation with the speech therapist and the OT, and we said, will probably music help with his speech, because he doesn't have speech right now. So probably because he's so in tune with that aspect, could it help us? So now we
Yep.
added music therapy on there, something we didn't even know existed, until all of a sudden we started being aware of our child and the things that he was drawn to, and then how do we add those things in. So financial planning was something that we did not think about. And for me, one of the things when I was reading your article, we speak about affordability of all of this. A lot of what we know and what we read is that a lot of children don't get the opportunity to actually go into all of these therapies and things because of the affordability of them. And those of us then who are blessed to have the provision to actually get our kids into all of this, they still then that lack of understanding of how then do we actually start to plan for this. Some of these things come about immediately. You get the diagnosis and you can jump into those things. And some of them, they come along the way. My question, though, to you is, you get the diagnosis. All of these things come about. What should I be thinking about once I've gone through the diagnosis, once I've gone through the understanding of what they need, once I've gone through, I've found now all of the therapies and actually all of that, as I'm creating this new world that we need to move into as the family, as parents, what should I start thinking about when it comes to our money?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think it's so multifaceted, right? Because you've got to think about the now, but you've also got to think about the future and what
Yeah.
that looks like. And I know, I mean, for most parents, right, we always think about what will happen if I'm not here anymore.
Yes,
And
yes.
that is the reality that is very daunting for a child who's got any sort of disability, because it's not a matter of the child reaching the age of, say, 18 or 21, and then being self-sufficient. It goes so much beyond that. And
Yes.
whatever decisions you make, you've got to consider the lifespan of the child, not just the lifespan of you. Because most people's typical financial planning is, I plan for how long I'm going to live and to get my kids to a certain age so that they're independent. And you've got to almost plan for the worst case scenario. I mean, we all hope and believe and pray that our children will progress far beyond what we are told, right? In terms of therapists, doctors, everything else, the results of tests and everything. But we've
Yes.
got to plan for the worst case scenario. So if there's a degree of dependency, when and how do we make sure that that doesn't impact them negatively from a financial perspective? So
Yes.
the steps that I would suggest that parents look at is they've got to look at where they are right now and what the current plan and budget looks like. Because often
Okay.
we start planning for, like you said, the therapy, the extra stuff, the OT, the this, the that. And then we've got the medical side of it to
Yes.
look at. And medically doesn't cover everything. Like
Okay.
that,
Okay.
a lot of people think, okay, I've got medical aid, but medical aid doesn't cover everything. And I learned that the hard way because we very quickly reached caps on some of the speech therapy and occupational therapy when I walked this journey years ago, when the kids were very young. And the other thing is that sometimes you think that this is going to be, okay, I've got to give it 2 years or so of intense therapy, and thereafter it might like reduce. And that's not always
Yes.
the
Yes.
case,
Yes. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. That's
So
true.
thinking that you could tap into savings to give it, the best effort now is not always the reality that we face as time progresses. And you also mentioned something else that's really important, like the therapy and the solutions that we find often require a lot of pivoting because
Yes.
things
Yes.
change all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So you might think, you know what, I'm going to go with this therapist and this is what I'm going to pay. And you work out your budget and everything is great. And then there's a change in therapy or there's additional
Mm-hmm.
things required or the frequency changes, right? And then
Yes.
you've got to pivot and that budget changes completely. So you've almost got to say, listen, this is my budget, but I've got a contingency buffer in there so that there's no break in continuity should something happen. So
Yeah.
you've almost got to have like an emergency buffer in there because, there's things like variable income that we earn or changes to our income or your tax bracket changes and something goes. And then you've got to adjust for that impact to your disposable income and the impact that it then has to your budget. And then secondary to that is aside from the basic stuff like the healthcare and the provisions for medical aid and therapy and all of that comes the schooling. Now, in my experience, there are very few schools that might always fit what you
Yes.
premium.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So
Yes.
the reality is that aside from the therapy and things, you've got this extra higher cost implication for getting the right fit school to meet the needs of your child. And over and above the schooling, we've traveled sometimes excessive distances just to get the child to the right school. So the transport costs and things just layer on top of that. So your education cost is not just your school bill, it's the traveling because you're traveling far beyond where normal parent would travel to get the child to school and back. You've
Yes.
got potentially additional cost because you've got to make sure that it's the right person transporting the child because they can't just travel with anyone because they won't be
Yes.
comfortable traveling with anyone.
Yes.
And not
Yes.
everyone's going to understand them, be able to communicate with them and things the way they need to, right? Because a majority of our kids have limited verbal communication ability and things like
Yes.
that.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's another consideration. So we've never been able to put my son into transport. We've always had to transport him ourselves because it just would not work
Doesn't work
for
out.
him. And I can't risk him having a meltdown and then, being with somebody who's not going to be able to understand what's going to happen. So in that scenario, you have that additional costs as well. So just to take 2 steps back and to frame it, it's a lot about budgeting, but not just budgeting for the now, budgeting with a contingency for the ability to pivot when things need to pivot. I mean, we were called in at various schools several times to say, listen, this is not working. What what is your plan B? We need to look at another school. You need to look at this therapy. You need to look at,
Yes.
and when you have a budget and you're also balancing your home life, your work life, your budget, your child's needs, amongst all of these things, it can be incredibly overwhelming to say, okay, I know my child now needs a teaching assistant for him, but I can't afford rand a month additional to be able to pay that and cover a person sitting with him 24/7 or throughout his schooling day.
During the school day.
And that sort of thing. So there's those sort of things that come and can throw you totally off. Then in planning for the future, it's important, and you mentioned it as well, the system around the child extends far beyond just your immediate circle of your home. Often it includes caregivers that are grandparents or, caregivers outside of the family unit that's also employed into the space and things like that. So there's a cost associated with that as well that needs to be considered, because a creche or aftercare environment doesn't necessarily work for every child, and obviously that comes at additional costs as well. And when you're not around, what happens next? So whether you're not around for just a period of time during the day, or whether you're not around because you've now passed on and something needs to happen, that planning needs to fit in. So when it comes to estate planning, it's really crucial, because our kids may not be able to manage the money themselves, even when they reach a maturity level. So that requires additional planning, be it a trust or be it somebody who we can trust to then sit on as trustees and things like that. I often say to parents, it is better to nominate and to have an institution look after it, so there's a level of independence alongside somebody who cares for them, like a caregiver or a guardian or a parent. The reason for that is you don't know if that person's going to be there and available when you need them to call on them, but the institution is likely to always be there. So there's a degree of continuity management in that aspect. So I'll tell you, there was an incident where one of our clients years ago insisted that the only person he could trust was his brother. So his brother was nominated to be the executor on the estate and all of those kind of things. And they were both in a car accident together.
Oh, no. Okay.
So he could not fulfill that, because then the brother is now in ICU and this person has passed away. And then you've got to go the whole court route to now get that overturned and somebody else appointed. And it becomes very difficult. So life can happen. That scenario is very real. So you've got to make sure that that continuity happens. But I think the other important thing is whoever you nominate has to have the capacity to fulfill that role and the willingness.
Yeah.
Because we do what we do because we love our kids, right? But it takes a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
And will somebody else have the willingness and the capacity to tolerate, manage, and still love them in those circumstances? Because being with a child who's having a good day is very different to being with a child who's having a very bad day.
Yes. Very different, very different.
Yeah, and that person has to be able to navigate both those scenarios.
Thanks for that. So I want to just go back a little bit. So now the question, because that was then, what are the questions that I should be thinking of as a parent when I'm thinking about financial planning for the short, medium, and long term, basically? In the short and medium, it's the educational costs, the medical costs, the therapy costs, and any other additional things that may come through. But then there's also the food cost, that now, because it also impacts our grocery list, because some of our kids refuse to eat anything that isn't pale in color. So all of a sudden there's an actual shift there. And then there's the long term of, like you're saying, getting someone who's going to be there and actually look after this child should you no longer be there. And like one of the things that I was already thinking about when you're talking about this case that you have is that even as parents, you can't assume that I'm going to die and you're going to be left, because there are many times when all of us are in the car and then what happens then? So to actually think of that, what I want to ask is that, okay, I've got all of these things. When I come to you as a financial planner, what are the things I should disclose fully so that you as a financial planner are able to truly give me all the solutions and options that are there. Because when it comes to money, we get very, very touchy around the conversation of money. And it is the thing also that becomes the barrier in truly being able to plan well for your financial futures. Is because either we're not sharing who actually needs to be beneficiaries on this, or we're not sharing exactly how much am I getting in and all of that to it. But we're here now. And we've understood that in order for our child to truly be taken care of while we are around and when we're not around, I'm coming to Riona now. Riona, what should I disclose? What are the things that we don't think of to disclose that we must disclose to help us create a great financial plan?
So I would say the most important thing, and I agree with you, there's a lot of fear and stigma associated with having sort of robust, transparent conversations.
Yes.
And we need to put that aside and say, listen, I need to be as open as possible, because this person, as much as they're an expert, can't do their best unless I give them as much information as I need to. So the first thing is you've got to be open about the family dynamics. So a lot of times people don't want to share the actual dynamics in the family, the makeup, children outside of marriages, because we've got a plan for children that are included in the ecosystem, because people think that if I nominate a beneficiary, the money is going to go to that beneficiary. In reality, in South African law, there are nuances to that. So if you don't have a will, you go through a process of interstate succession. And interstate succession means that the government will assess who should have claim to this money based on financial dependency. And the people who actually you might want to inherit may not if there's no will in place, right? So that's a big risk, which means a will is fundamentally important to making sure that the right people inherit and that the proceeds go where it's needed most, because only you know what would happen there.
Yes.
There's also dynamics that come in if there are some kids that are neurotypical and others that are not, right? Because the needs are very different. So a lot of times people will buy a standard will, or they'll download a will from the internet, and it'll say, goes to my children equally. And that might not necessarily be the right thing and the needs of that particular dynamics of your family. So be very careful when you don't have somebody look at your unique situation. The other thing is that a person being a parent might not necessarily mean that in the absence of one parent, the other can substitute and do what they were doing when they were two, or when the primary caregiver was there. So there's always one person who takes on a little bit more responsibility in terms of primary caregiving. And their understanding of a child with special needs or with a disability is very different to somebody who is maybe off at work for majority of the time. It's not the primary caregiver. And their ability to then fit the bill might not necessarily be the same. So there's complexities that come in with that, because we often think about replacing the income of the person who makes the money. But we don't think about the person who's at home keeping things going, or the person who's giving the care, and the cost implication of them no longer being in the dynamic. So you've got to plan for that, because if I think about it this way, right? When I was young, my mom was at home, but she might not have generated income, but the role she fulfilled in keeping that home moving, making sure we had everything we need to have, making sure we got to school and got back, making sure that there was food, making sure that the home was running, that we did our homework, that we went wherever we needed to go, and whatever it is. To replace that effort would have a cost implication, because now you need somebody to prepare meals, run around, pick up kids from school, make sure they do their homework. If they're sick, make sure that they're there to look after them, and all of those kind of things. So you don't necessarily quantify what that role looks like from a cost perspective. But if that person's not there, a caregiver coming in is going to cost an X amount per month. And we've got a plan for both scenarios of of that.
breadwinner not being there and also caretaker not being
Yes,
there. What are the financial implications of these movements?
yes.
Yeah, yeah, okay,
Because
okay.
even somebody to drive the kids to therapy school and back, it's going to cost.
And the cost.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
And then it's the car and it's the maintenance of the car and it's the tires and it's the petrol and everything else, right? So aside from
Okay,
the direct cost, there's indirect costs and things that we need to
okay.
look at. So that also comes to play, and we often don't look at it. But when we're doing estate planning, we've got to look at all of those dynamics. Then we've got to look at, what would happen from a household perspective. So, for example, would the home be paid off? Would the kids stay in that home? Would they have to move to a different home? Would they have to move to a different province? Most times people live and work one place, but their family, extended
Is in
families
another province.
elsewhere,
Mm,
and what would that look like? And would there still be access to therapy and things? Because our children, when they get comfortable with a certain therapist, it becomes a problem. I mean, we had an
yeah.
incident where the therapist left to another country and it
Trying to
railroaded
get your
everything.
child to then be
We
used
we
to a
lost
new
6 months.
therapist. Yes,
Literally
I
took six
understand.
months step back.
I fully understand that. Yes.
So we've
Mm,
got to think about that as well, because you also want to make sure that the people who you trust to take over this responsibility, willing and able, means if they need to uproot themselves to be where the child is comfortable, that they could do that, and that's a big
yeah, yeah,
ask.
yeah.
And it might not be possible, but then you've got a contingency plan to say, okay, if it can't happen, what dynamics does that bring? So when that conversation happens with the financial advisor, we need to really have that robust conversation about all of these
Yes.
things.
Yes.
Who is this person? Are they willing? If we're leaving a particular amount of money in trust and things like that, how do we build that? Because if this person that is going to be the guardian going forward is not good with money, what does that bring in, and how does that work? Can we trust them financially as much as we could trust them with the kids in the day-to-day sort of things? Would they make the right decisions? And that's why having independent trustees also has merit, because independent trustees are going to look at it without the
Mm,
emotional attachment,
yes,
but they're
yes. No
also going to
bias. Mm,
prioritize the child's needs. So often, what
yes.
happens in that scenario practically is that they would say, okay, cool. So, what does schooling cost? What does the therapy cost? Bring us the invoices. Then the invoices come into the trust and the trust pays directly. So, there's no middleman where things could go, you know,
Yes,
um,
yes. Missing.
missing, yeah, or that sort of thing. And then the day-to-day food and things like that is also catered for. So that way the money can last longer, the provisions can be invested, and then they also manage those type of investments to make sure it's doing the best that it can, with some sort of guarantees and safety nets and things, so that you don't suddenly say, okay, I've put this money, but I've put it in a risky investment, and next minute it's half of what it was a
Yeah.
month ago, for example. Because I mean, we can see what's happening in the economy, what's happening
Yes.
globally, and things like that. So you've got to be aware that the person has to, be savvy, and they need support. And that's where it's important that the financial planning extends beyond your life, so that those people have that support that they need through the will, but also through the estate company that's managing it and the trust, services. There's also, this trust generally will span the lifetime of the child with disabilities, for example. So it needs to look at that as well. And then often we think about the expenses that need to be provided for in terms of the normal monthly expenses, but we don't think about the other trigger things that happen. For example, your changes to infrastructure, your changes to things like wheelchairs or cars or things like that, that are capital costs that might come in at different intervals that would need to be
Yes.
accounted for. So we generally will plan for things like that as well. And the other big thing that parents need to consider is, what will the impact of this have on my retirement? Because we also are going to age. And
Yes.
we also have the impact of, how long will we be able to then look after to the level that we would need to look after,
Yeah.
and the amount
So
of
are you
care that we need
saying,
to give.
mm, so when you think about retirement, so are you saying that in the planning and in the thinking, there is my retirement fund that I'm building as I'm working that needs to be built, that needs to have the conversation around how do I continue to maintain some, at least the equal level of life that we currently have now. Plus, then I need to also be creating another fund which is dedicated to looking after this child, especially when I start to hit retirement and am not necessarily now earning money, which pours into this fund, but now we start drawing out of it. And
Exactly.
this fund also needs to outlive me because my child is going to outlive me and be able to take care of them for their duration. So the planning needs to look at creating two secure funds at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's two pockets of finance.
Yes,
So a lot
yes.
of times parents neglect their retirement planning. Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, it's because you want to try and give this child now everything you can. So while you're working, you put all of the funds into this and you don't provision adequately, right? And this is not just in this scenario, it's in a lot of scenarios where we're finding there's a huge retirement gap, but it's worse when funds are spread between other things and there's other
Yes.
elements. And as a parent, you think that's the best thing to do, but you don't think about that long-term plan. And you almost have to make sure that you've got your retirement secured so that you can be as present as possible for as long as possible so that you don't have to, like be burdened with that financial distress as well. And then the separate part would be the planning for the future for the child post, your demise and things like that. The other
Yes.
thing that comes in when we think about retirement is if we are going to be the primary caregiver, when you go into retirement and you become frailer, what happens then?
Yes.
Because you might have additional needs that come in and the child still has the same needs, although they're probably an adult by then. And then it's a double whammy in terms of the care needs that's going to come into the family dynamic that needs to be looked at. And we find that a lot of times generally the females of the family pick up that, and it could be daughters and things like that. There's a
Wow.
thing I read yesterday. It's called the burden of the daughter, which is very prevalent in certain demographical groups and things like that, where the daughters of often have to step up and pick up that role of being the caregiver for aging parents and things like that. But if you've got that happening, it can be quite a bit. So even in us now as being caregivers to kids, we often in the sandwich generation where we're also caregivers for parents and we're
Yes.
stuck
Yes.
in that mix of having to balance all of it and still think about our future and our financial planning. And that brings up another interesting thing because often we're planning for this element, but there's other dependency on us that we need to consider as well in our planning. So, for example, we're planning for the child that has the disability and for the other kids in the room and things. But if something should happen to us, there'll be a financial impact to other people beyond just our immediate family, and that has to also be considered when we're doing our financial planning. So it could be parents, it could be grandparents, it could be other siblings, or all of that
Yeah.
needs to be considered.
This is a big conversation that you need to have with your financial planner to assist you build it. And one of the things which I've picked up as a theme in all the conversations we've had is this ecosystem that we actually need to build around our child, but ourselves also. Because when we think of the ecosystem, we think, okay, the teachers are going to talk to the OT and the speech therapist, but we also don't realize that the dentist is also part of the ecosystem because the things he does in the mouth will impact what happens at speech. So they need to have a line of communication. But today, you're adding the financial planner in there, which then to me is a big thing that says your financial planner, your financial advisor, the person who helps you look after your money, isn't the person you just walk in once, you draw this plan, and then you kind of just walk away. They need to be part of this constant conversation. Every single time there's a shift and change in our world, they need to be brought in because we need to then readjust where we need to readjust. We need to, because like we said, our kids grow up and their needs change along the way. And maybe what we planned for in the last 5 years now actually needs to shift in the next 5 years. And so I'm hearing and I am stressing that our financial planning also needs to be part of the ecosystem which means that our level of transparency needs to just we need to trust that our money is in the right hands by bringing in the financial planner that we bring in to actually think about the things we need to think about. So continue to build this ecosystem.
Yeah.
Question that I have. Yes, sorry, you wanted to say something?
Now, I wanted to say that your financial planning discussion should be at least once a year.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
there's so many, I mean, and that's typical. It's not even based on, the current scenario we're talking about, but at least
Yes.
once a year, you need to review where you are to make sure that it's still aligned because things change so often.
Okay.
And then I think, I would say if you have specific life events that happen, for example, a diagnosis, an
Yes.
additional child, a change in occupation, location, job, anything like that, change in marital status, it triggers an additional review
Okay.
because it's so
Okay.
fundamentally important and the dynamics that come to play are so big.
Okay. Okay. Noted on that. Question. Life insurance.
Mm.
How does this play in the mix of the financial savings that we are trying to create? There's my retirement planning, there's the savings pot that allows for short, medium, and long-term planning for my child and all the needs that they're going to have. Plus, then there is the other children in the household who may not be neurodiverse, like you've said. So there are probably education things that we need to think about there for them when they get to varsity, all of that. Where does life insurance fit into all of this? And how should we be thinking of life insurance and that amount at the end of the day that we decide to put a pin on and pay towards?
Yeah. So I would say the best way to do it is to have the conversation with your financial planner where you explain exactly how things are working, what you're spending money on, what is important to you, what are the goals, what are the family dynamics. And what they will do is they'll do a full needs analysis and they will then say, okay, cool, what we need to provision is X amount. Now, the opportunity that we have with life insurance is we are able to provide the income and the needs after we've passed. Because what life insurance does is it says, what would Nazi be able to derive as income in her lifetime? And if she's not there, how do we put the dependents in the same situation that they would have been in had she been here? So they're basically trying to replace the value in terms of income that you would have generated, right? And like I mentioned before, it's not necessarily income, can also be like the services and whatever you provide, where it's people who typically don't earn an income but provide
Yes.
care. So it's assessing and monetizing what that would look like, and then providing a value to say, okay, this is where we need to be. And the other important thing is we've got to take into consideration inflation. Because remember, when you earn an income, your income changes year on year. But when you
Yes.
provide life cover, it needs to also be able to provision for inflation. Because you mentioned food. My child only eats chicken strips, right? He likes the crunch of it. That is all he eats for lunch, every day of the week. So it brings a different dynamic. Somebody might say, oh, that's cheap, though, Okay, not really, actually, because it's a particular type of one and not any other as
Yes.
well.
I,
Um,
I fully understand that. My
yeah,
child only eats rolls from Woolworths. I don't know how he knows what the difference is.
yeah,
Specific fish fingers. My child is a
yeah.
fish finger child.
Okay. So I mean, I've also got the roles thing, but so but yeah, so it's a thing, and not, I mean, it's not like when we were kids where you ate what was on the table or you did not eat.
Yes, yes.
Now you're making two or three things because people are eating different things, and you've got a provision for that because the cost of that is not going to stay the same. What I paid for it 2 years ago is not what I'm paying for it now, and that cost is going to continue to escalate. So you've got a provision for that. So that's why when a financial planner looks at it, they look at it and say, okay, cool. How much do you need as if something happened today? But if something happened in a few years' time, would that money be able to still do what it needs to do? So that's that provision. So that's how we ensure you with life cover, where we say, okay, If I do R1 million worth of cover, this is how much income we could generate and how long that income would then last. This is how long before that money is depleted fully. And that's the kind of consideration we need to do. Typically, I mean, if you look at medical aid, plus the food, plus the therapy, plus the schooling and all of that, it's a significant amount of money per month that would be needed. And to relate that back to a lump sum value for the lifetime is a difficult task. It's not a task we can thumbsuck and we can just say, I think it's 2 million is enough, right? Because everybody thinks they've got enough. When we do the maths, it's a whole different scenario. And we break it down, and then we've got to explain to them, listen, how did we get there? And a good financial planner will do that exercise with you. They will take you on a journey to make sure that you're comfortable and you understand, because the aim is for you to leave that exercise knowing I'm paying X amount, something happens to me, I'm got peace of mind that my kids are gonna be okay, my family is gonna be okay, my bond is gonna be paid. I'm not gonna have kids that don't have a home, and that sort of thing. And that peace of mind is very difficult to put a price tag on it. But what we try and do is make it as affordable as possible as well. So, like I mentioned when I spoke about my dad passing, something is always better than nothing. So if you can't afford 5 million that you need, and you can afford 1 million, I would suggest we start with 1 million and we taper it up as we can afford a bit more, so that you can have something, because that something can go further than nothing at all.
Yeah. Thank you. I think one of the things for me that you're really painting, thank you for painting, first of all, just the importance of having a financial planner. I think we try to do it by ourselves, and we think we can, but there's so many other things that we may not be thinking about, like the inflation rate. What is actually going to happen to these fish fingers and chicken strips in 5 years' time? And we don't think of that. And so the importance of having that financial planner. To wrap up our chat, because we can go our chat. For me, one of the things I'm really taking away is get into conversations and start to build from there. Is there something that in your experience, so your personal experience of realizing the impact of this, and especially because you're in the industry, so there is having the industry knowledge of being able to plan for my life well and having the reality that this is the life that I'm living. Is there anything else that you can share with us just to get people into that door of seeking a financial planner or advisor to help them?
So the one thing is, there's this perception that financial planning is for the rich and it's unaffordable. That is not true. Financial planning is for everybody. Everybody should have access to financial planning, and that is one thing that I hope that we can achieve in a lot of what we're doing at Vouch as well. That everybody should have a conversation with a financial planner, because life cover can start from 200 Rand a month.
Yeah.
And like a KFC meal and stuff is like that sort of price. You know what I mean? So if we can afford to spend money on some of those things that are not necessities, we can definitely afford to have some sort of life cover. So I would ask everybody to please have a conversation. There are also so many other important benefits that you can unlock by speaking to a financial advisor. For example, how to manage your tax, how to leverage some of the tax benefits that you can derive through using different instruments, and also opening up your deductions and things because of the expenses you're incurring with a child that has any sort of disability. And those things can help fund the planning that you need. I mean, if you can bring your tax burden down, you can use that extra disposable income to then fund the savings as well as the insurance and all of that you need. So it doesn't have to be an out-of-pocket expense. We so often want to work for money. We don't always make our money work. And there are ways that we can trigger making our money work for us.
I love that.
And this can be a very expensive exercise to actually raise a child never mind a child that has additional needs. So leveraging whatever the government is putting there for us to save a little bit on tax here and there, extra, medical credits and all of those kind of things where we can really help the bigger scheme of things. So I would say, please speak to somebody who understands how you can leverage these things so that you can, because insurance, tax, some of these things we should have been taught at school, we weren't, but they're definitely not a DIY exercise. You need somebody who understands the dynamics that can help you to leverage it. And we often find that there are products that can also help you to not pay tax as well as to save tax. And it's about leveraging those things as well, because we may not necessarily think that a child is going to need to go to tertiary education, but they might surprise us. And when they do surprise you, you need to have provisions to be able to pay for it, right?
Yes.
And that is a welcome surprise that we want to, but we don't want to then be caught without, the provisions. And I think that is why it is so important that there are some of these things that you put in place. And especially because you're planning for the lifetime, things like a tax-free savings account can do phenomenal things to grow, even with small amounts saved, into millions. And they are completely tax-free. So there are all of these opportunities, and my ask is that please just reach out to an advisor that you feel you're comfortable with. If you would like to reach out to us at Vouch, you're more than welcome to, and we will help you as best as we can. So to your community as well,
I will definitely be
seek
putting
advice. Yeah.
I will definitely be putting your details when we put out all of this content. But Rihanna, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You've given me stuff to think about and with the conversations I need to go back and have with my financial advisor. But thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the article that triggered this. And I'm really hoping and praying that even if it's one person who's able to step into that space, drop the fear around talking around money, and also equip themselves to how else can I make sure that my child is taken care of? Because that's all we really want as parents. How do we make sure that our kids always have what they need? And so this is one of those tools. So thank you so much. Thank you for your time. And I'm looking forward to hopefully tapping in more and having more conversations down the line on how to better financially plan for our neurodiverse children.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you for the platform, and for the opportunity. I'm hoping it also touches as many people as possible.